Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is rejecting the latest truce proposal put forward by Hamas. That plan calls for a release of Israeli hostages in exchange for Palestinian detainees. Netanyahu calls the proposal absurd, but he has agreed to send delegates to Qatar to continue talks. Netanyahu has also approved a ground offensive in Rafah and a plan to evacuate civilians. Meanwhile, hundreds of Israelis protested in Tel Aviv again today, calling for the release of the remaining hostages held in Gaza. So for more developments, we have the chance to speak with Alex Cadier in Jerusalem.
It's been days, if not more than a week, of us reporting that the negotiations had either gone nowhere or stalled or not moved and had been rejected, and Hamas was not responding, or it was in Israel's court or in Hamas's court. Well, now some movement, as you can hear the last call for prayer of the day ringing out here in Jerusalem, some movement, that Israeli response. Now, Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister, has said that Hamas's offering is ridiculous and unacceptable, but that an Israeli delegation will travel to Doha to continue those negotiations. Now, that in contrast to the last negotiations in Cairo, where Israel did not send any delegation at all to negotiate. That was more than a week ago. Now they will have those discussions. Now, the counter-proposal that was put forward by Hamas today involves the release of those Israeli hostages, women, the injured hostages, as well as the elderly, in exchange for 700 to 1,000 Palestinian prisoners. And this also has to be part of a sequence of phases, including a phase which would then lead to a permanent ceasefire and the full removal of Israeli troops from Gaza. Now, those two things Israel cannot contend with. And although Prime Minister Netanyahu says, look, this is unacceptable, Israeli officials behind the scenes say this is something we can work with, and they're heading to Doha to do so. Now, the other aspect, of course, is the offensive in Rafah. That is the other thing that Prime Minister Netanyahu has signed off on, very much objected to by the United States, including by Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who had a very clear warning for the Israelis. Let's have a listen to what he had to say.
President Biden has been very clear that given the large number of civilians in Rafah, about 1.4 million, many of whom, as the Foreign Minister said, have been displaced from other parts of Gaza, we have to see a clear and implementable plan, not only to get civilians out of harm's way, but also to make sure that once out of harm's way, they're appropriately cared for, with shelter, with food, with medicine, with clothing, and we've not yet seen such a plan.
An implementable plan, says Antony Blinken. That's what they want to see. Joe Biden called an operation in Rafah a red line. The only plan proposed so far by the Israelis is to move those 1.5 million displaced people in Rafah to humanitarian islands. They didn't specify what they would look like, where they would be, how they would work. So for now, that does not seem to meet the standard asked by the United States of an implementable plan, but that may change in the next few days.
Something to watch for. We were talking earlier, the arrival of that first aid ship. What is happening with the distribution of supplies?
That World Central Kitchen ship had unloaded 1 crate of food. It's rice, flour, and other proteins for those people so desperately needing it in Gaza. That is the pilot project. It is the very first salvo in this maritime corridor, the very first attempt to get a ship delivering food to Gaza. That is one of the 3 main routes. The airdrops, of course, another way to do it. But the real pressure we hear from the UN agencies, from the Norwegian Refugee Council, from the World Food Programme, is that there are much more effective, much more efficient ways to deliver aid to those 500,000 Palestinians that the UN says are on the verge of starvation, and that is through the road checkpoints, through Israel, through the roads into Gaza, because that is where the distribution gets ever so complicated because of the ongoing conflict and also because of the destruction. So certainly this ship arriving will be a symbol of hope, a symbol of relief for so many people in Gaza. It will not solve the problem yet. It may be part of the solution, but certainly there will be continued pressure on Israel to allow far more aid to enter Gaza.
Alex Cadier in Jerusalem.